John Cohen. He is a neurosurgeon, I believe, from the Rome area and ran for Congress in the last session, as well as is now talking to folks around the country about term limits. And welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Martha. Glad to be here.
So tell us, first of all, why you chose this issue.
Well, this to me is one of the critical issues we're going to have to face as a nation in order to reform Congress. I think there's no doubt that we've seen the dysfunction in Congress, whether it's Democrat-controlled or Republican-controlled. We have an epidemic there, and it's called Potomac fever. And the vaccine for Potomac fever is term limits. And that's what I'm fighting to see that we get passed.
So we did pass term limits, obviously, during the contract with America, and they were deemed to be unconstitutional. But then the Congress never took them back up again. I think that's one of the big points that the legislature, the Congress, misses about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court will overturn something, but that does not mean that you can never revisit it again. Basically, what they're saying is, in the way you wrote it, it is unconstitutional. You need to take another pass at it. But they never did, and it's been 25 years.
That's exactly right. And still some of the warriors out there who've been fighting for it are still fighting for it. And you're right. Just because the Supreme Court said no in the Thornton case, it doesn't mean that it's anathema to the Constitution. It just says the way you tried to enact it was against our founding document. And we have a way of using the Constitution to actually get it passed, and that's through using Article 5, which allows the states, each state house, to pass a resolution saying we need to have a convention to talk about term limits. And if we get 34 states to do that, then we can get the representatives from each state together and come up with a term limit amendment. That gets sent back to the states for ratification, and once it does, it becomes part of the U.S. Constitution and could not get overturned by the Supreme Court.
Now, we've made some progress through elections over the last 15 years as far as the length of time people are in Congress, because right now half the Congress is 0 to 8 years, and you have 8 to 16 years is about 20%, and then there's 31% that has 16 years or more in service, and that has changed a bit. There has been some turnover recently. What do you think needs to happen, and where are we in this process?
Yeah, I think one of the things that frustrates most people is the consolidation of power in these people who've been there in that 16 year to more group. And I think that is one of the biggest problems is we really don't have 435 people in our House of Representatives helping craft legislation, make decisions. It's really down to a group of about 12 who've been there the longest and amassed the most money. And so term limits would have an immediate effect in evening out the power across all 435 representatives and allowing for more ideas, expanding the candidate pool, and just providing more of a servant leader ethos rather than a career focused power grabbing ethos that we have now.
So what can Georgia do? What can we do here in Georgia?
Well, absolutely. Georgia can pass the term limits resolution that we have. It passed the Senate. Senate resolution passed this past session. The House can immediately take it up in the next session, pass it, and then Governor Kemp can sign it. And that would add us to the list of states. There are 20 now that have signed on. We would be the 21st. There are several states considering it this year. And we can march slowly toward that number of 34. Hopefully, Congress will see the states are about to do this and make the decision, and that they have a mechanism, obviously, for proposing amendments, and they could take it up with a simple majority vote in Congress to pass that, and then the states could ratify it.
Well, I think that would be easier to do than it has been in the past, mainly because there has been a fairly significant turnover where many of the, a majority of the House is 16 years or less. What do you, because I know I've signed on to the U.S. term limits when I ran for Congress 9 years ago. And so at that time it was 12 years in the House and 12 years in the Senate. Is that what they're still, where they still are on that?
You know, it's interesting. There are a lot of very smart people who that I think everyone agrees there needs to be something, right? And so I think there's room for disagreement as to what that number is. We certainly need people to have institutional knowledge, and fortunately, or unfortunately, I think our federal government is so complicated now that you probably cannot say, oh, one term in Congress is enough to be effective. I mean, so we know that there are certain levels of limits that probably would render everyone ineffective. And so I think we have to figure out, what is that level that allows someone to mature in the position but doesn't allow them to grab more power than they need to or have more undue influence. And other people have offered, maybe you do a rotate on, rotate off. That was Ben Franklin's original solution in the Pennsylvania Constitution. Was
one of the articles. I mean, one of the things that I think helped was when they had term limits on the committees. That's kind of was the answer that Newt Gingrich came up with. That's been done away with now, but they had term limits on the committees, and that caused people to, if they didn't have the power anymore, it caused them to be able to want to leave. And also, the people that don't support term limits will say, well, then that you're going to give the staffers all this power, okay? And I'm a big fan. I love the Robert Caro books about the United States Senate and Master of the Senate. And I was surprised to find out that when Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader of the Senate back in the late 1950s, he had a secretary and one staff person and a driver. That's all he had. Okay. Yeah. Now the average senator has 60 people working for them, 30 in Washington and 30 in the state. And Congress is about half that. And that's just ridiculous. It is ridiculous. The staffs have burgeoned. It's just wrong how they handle all of this, but they're never going to police themselves. That's the problem. They're never going to police themselves. And I don't mean, look, I'm a strong supporter of term limits, okay? But I'm also concerned about the fact that state legislators are going to look at it that they're next and they're not going to support it either.
Well, I do think state legislators are serving in a very different capacity than our federal legislators. Most of it, if you look across the country and certainly in the state of Georgia, it's not a full-time position. The pay is not something that someone could to live on, and there's just not the same temptation to grab power or go on speaking tours and write books, et cetera, for a long tenure there. So I view more state legislation, especially in Georgia, the way it is more of a volunteer service. And at that point, I say, as long as you're an effective volunteer, then that probably term limits don't have the same usefulness. And those people are much more directly related to their constituents. I mean, you look at the average district is 750,000 people, and it is very hard to get to know your federal elected official in Congress, and so whereas a state house rep represents a fraction that number of people.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you giving us the time right now on this today. Tell us where people can get more information.
Yeah, you can obviously go to ustermlimits.org and take a look at what we're doing. There are maps that show which states are considering legislation, which ones have already signed on. Certainly reach out and talk to your state House member. In particular, the Senate has passed this. Send an email to Speaker Ralston, encourage him. Republicans and Democrats in this state have overwhelmingly said this is something we want passed.